Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 3 of my 2022 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be using this stamp set by Rochelle Ann Miller for MFT called Snow Sweet. So I've stamped my images out in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock. I'm also going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Feelin' Frosty 6x8 pad. So I'm going to pull a sheet out and tuck that under my cardstock panel so I can use that to pull my color inspiration from. I'm going to be coloring using my Copic markers, and I'm going to start with the girl's skin. For that I'm using E000, E00, and E11. The only skin that she has showing is her face, since she's all bundled up for this snowy day. So I'm going to start shading up around her hairline with the E11, blend that out with the E00, and then fill in the lower part of her face with the E000. I'll also add a little E11 to her nose. And then I'm going to come in and give her some rosy cheeks using RV10 and RV11. I like these cool tone pinks for winter because it just seems to go with this season. Then I'm moving on to her hair, and there's not a ton of it showing, but I still want what is there to look nice and highlighted and, you know, a little more natural than just coloring it in a solid block. So I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53 to start. And for hair, I like to use my lightest shade first and kind of build up that color. So I laid in the E50 where I eventually want my darkest shades to go. I'm kind of like just mapping out those shadowed areas. And then I blended that out with the E51 and then added in some E53. And then I went back down in the reverse. And then I felt like I needed something a little darker to add some more depth. So I went in with the E44, and I'm using the very tip of that marker and super soft little strokes to get the finest lines that I possibly can. And then I'll go over those with the E53 to help blend those out. And then I skipped right down to the E50 to blend that out even further because I didn't want it to get lost in that very small area. So now I'm ready to move on to the bunny, and I'm going to use T0, T1, and T3 for that. I wanted to do a soft gray bunny because a white bunny I thought would blend too much into the snow in the background, so I thought a soft gray bunny would be cute. So I used a T3 for my shadows, and now I'm coming in with that T1 and just making sure to pull that darkest color into that mid-tone and drag it with me so I get a nice smooth blend. And once I have that laid in, I will fill in the rest of the bunny with the T0. So this card is actually going to be more of like a friendship Valentine card, and to be honest, it's not going to even say Valentine anywhere on the card because I wanted to do something that could definitely be given for Valentine's Day, but if you've already made enough Valentine cards or you don't really send out Valentine cards for friends, this could be a card that you could send out any time of the year. It definitely ties into Valentine's Day because we've got those hearts in that pattern paper, and we've also, we're going to have a lot of like pink on the card and stuff like that, but it definitely could be just a winter card or really an any time of the year kind of card. So I'm moving on to the little lantern, and I'm coloring the metal parts in black using T3, T5, and T7. And then I'm also going to use those shades to color in the tiny little coal that's going down the snowman's belly. And I did squeeze in all 3 shades on there. And then I'm moving on to that adorable red squirrel. I just love him so much. You could color him any color, of course, but since I've already got the gray bunny, I definitely wanted to go for the red squirrel since those are my favorite. So I used E13, E15, and E17. And because he's so super tiny, normally I would cast a shadow on the tail where his body is in front of it, because that would be casting a shadow, but I was afraid that it would kind of blend in with the back of his body. So I actually left a little space for a highlight at the back of his tail, right where it meets his body, and that will help it stand out a bit more against him. For the acorn, I'm going to use E33 and E31 for the actual nut part. I use the E33 closest to the squirrel, blended out with the E31, and then went back for another touch of that E33 in the darkest space. And then for the little cap of the acorn, I'm using E43, E44, and E47. And I colored that in the same way with the darkest on the right and the highlight on the left. And then I'm moving on to my snowman, and I'm going to use BG10 and BG11. So I'm going to take that BG11 first, and I'm going to put some shadow on the right hand side of his body, also around the little coal, and I will also shade around the scarf. And you could really shade him on either side because his left side is kind of tipped down, so it would make sense to have that side in shadow as well. But I knew I was going to put him on the right side of the card, and I wanted my light source to be kind of in the center, so that would keep the left side of his face and the right side of her face in the highlighted part. So I blended out the BG11 with the BG10, and then I grabbed my colorless blender to go over the edge of the BG10 and soften that into the white cardstock. Just made sure to run over the edge of that BG10 and kind of make that edge a little bit more hazy as it pushes back into the cardstock. And then I also wanted to use that to add a look of glass in that lantern. And that will also help tie that color combo elsewhere on the card. And then for the carrot nose, I wanted to go with some more brownish oranges to kind of tie in to the browns that we've already got in the scene, especially with the red squirrel. I use YR12, YR14, and YR18, and then use the YR14 for the flame in the candle. I used E50 to add a little shading to the actual candle inside the lantern, but I needed a bit more depth, so I did come in with a little bit of the E51 as well. And then I used Y11 to cast a bit of a glow around that. And I did that both on the glass behind and also the candle and the glass in front. And then I went back to my RV10 and RV11. I used the RV11 to color in my critters' noses and the bunny's ear. And then I'm going to give all three of the rest of the images some rosy cheeks, just like I did with the girl, starting with the RV11 and then going around that with the RV10. And now I'm ready to start pulling in colors from that pattern paper. And I wanted to start with the lighter pink. I did add in RV13 to round out this color combo, so I used the RV13 as my darkest for the brim of her hat and also for her scarf. And that marker looked like it was about to leak on me, so I just pulled off the cap from the other end to equalize the pressure in the barrel, and that usually does the trick. Then I used RV11 to blend that out. And then I will go in with the RV10 as the highlight. I did the hat brim first to kind of see how I liked this combo together. And then I decided I liked it, so I went on to the scarf. I also wanted to use it on her striped tights, so I just picked a stripe and did those. And like I said, I'm going to do her shading on the left-hand side and keep her highlight on the right, in keeping with where she's going on the card. And then for the snowman, I wanted to tie these colors in there as well. So I tried to kind of count out how many spaces I would need to add in the various colors that I wanted to use on that. But his scarf is so stripy, like there's just so many stripes on there that I did lose count at some point, and so it ended up not being like perfectly spaced out with all the colors, but I think it's totally fine. There's enough stripes on there that I don't think it's super noticeable, but you could definitely simplify things and just color it in like 2 or 3 shades instead of trying to add as many as I did. I'm also going to carry that up and add a stripe on the hat. And sometimes on these little stripes, because they are so small on that scarf, I will just use the darkest and lightest shade of a trio combo. So next I wanted to pull in that darker pink heart in that background. So I went with RV14, RV17, and RV19. So I'm going to do one of the little stripes on her leg there. The other one is covered by the lantern. So it's just the one. And then of course I will go over to the snowman and do stripes on his scarf and his hat as well. So I kind of like started skipping one over, like I did the pink and then skipped one and then did the darker pink. But that's when I realized right away that I had miscounted, and so I just had to kind of go with the flow, and I knew I would have to kind of improvise later on as I continued to add in color, as in some spaces, you know, there's only 2 spots after the darker pink, and in some there's 3, but that's okay. So I'm moving on to like a cornflower blue combo, because there is that lighter blue heart in that background pattern paper. So for that I chose B41, B52, and B45. The B52 in this case is my mid-tone. So I started with the B45, and I'm going to do her hat and her jacket in this combo. So I blended out with the B52 for the mid-tone and then used the B41 for the highlight. And then I'm going to move down and color in her jacket, casting a shadow on the underside of her arms and also on the cuffs to define those a bit more as well. I did put a shadow up under her scarf and where the lantern is in front of her jacket, and also defined the edges of that pocket. And then I'm blending out with that B52 again and just pulling that color carefully toward the center and leaving enough space for a little bit of a highlight there so that the image doesn't look too flat. I did also add a touch of that B41 inside the lantern, since it is in front of her jacket and it would be made of glass, so you would see a little bit of that blue behind, but not a ton because of the glow of that candle. And then I'm going to do some more stripes on her tights, and of course move over to the snowman. So for his hat I did the stripe that was between the 2 pinks. And then for the scarf, I just decided to kind of just pick and choose somewhere close to the darker pink. And sometimes it's like a space away, and then sometimes it's right up next to it. So yeah, I could have counted those out a little bit better, but in my defense, they're so super tiny. So like I said, I think it would be really much more simple to color if you just did it in like a 2-color palette or something like that, but or even just white and a color. I think that would make it a lot easier as well. But I really wanted to tie in all the different shades in that background pattern paper, and those stripy details were just the perfect place to add those little pops of color. So now I'm going for that darker teal heart in the background, and I'm using BG32, BG45, and BG49 for that. I'm going to finish off her striped stockings and also give her some mittens to match, and then also come in with the snowman. I'm going to fill in both the top and bottom stripe of the hat with that combo. And I thought I could maybe get away with filling in all the rest of the stripes on the scarf with this combo, but there were places where there were two whites next to each other, and I didn't want those to be the same shade because it would just be too big of a block of the same color. So I just picked a couple here and there and then left the other one to be colored in with something else. So for those, I kept the BG32 and blended that out with the BG11. And then there were a couple of stripes that were still left on the longer part. So I just colored those in with the BG11 as the darkest and left the white cardstock as the highlight shade. So once I finish with that scarf, there's just her boots and the little pom-poms on both of her and the snowman's hats to color in. And I just decided to do them all in white, so I grabbed the BG11 and added some shading with that, and then blended that out with the BG10, and again left some white cardstock showing for the highlight. Then I grabbed my black Sakura jelly pen and got that going up to the side and went over the eyes of all of my images to make them nice and bright and shiny. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their coordinating dies. So now I'm going to go back to that Simple Stories Feelin' Frosty pattern paper pad and choose a few more colors to match. I wanted 4 different patterns to mix. So I had 2 scraps that I thought were going to work really well, but I was looking for one more that would kind of tie everything together, and I decided to go with this plaid. I thought that was super cozy for a winter/Valentine card. So I'm going to trim those out with a bunch of MFT dies. For this snowy looking polka dot print, I used the Wonky Stitch Rectangle Stacks. I did the second largest in that die set. I also used that for my snowdrifts and did the top edge with the Stitch Slimline Snowdrifts. You could use the regular version, I only have the Slimline. For our inspiration one, I did the A2 Stitch Rectangle Stacks set 2. I used the largest. The plaid print I just trimmed down with my paper trimmer, and then this little flag I used the Stitch Jumbo Fishtail flags, and that was the smallest die in that set. So I'm going to take the one that is going to be my background and pop that in my MISTI and stamp my sentiment. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp the sentiment that says "Your Snow Sweet," which I think can definitely work for Valentine's Day. At least where I live, Valentine's Day is usually just covered in snow. We have so much snow usually at the beginning of February. So I stamped that down a couple times to make sure I had a nice bold impression so it would stand out against that polka dot background. And then I trimmed it down an insert, and I trimmed that down to be 4 inches by 5¼ inches. And I'm going to stamp on that using Lawn Fawn Plastic Flamingo ink. And I'm going to use the little tree with the bird image that didn't fit on the front of the card. Also the other little bird and a little track in the snow against that white cardstock. So there's a closer look at that. And then I'm also going to use a pink card base to kind of fit into this Valentine theme in case you want to use it for Valentine's Day. So I'm just going to glue that insert to the inside of that card. And that cardstock, by the way, is from MFT. It used to be called Razzleberry. Now it is either Poppin' Pink or Ripe Raspberry. I'm not quite sure which one until I get them in person it will be, but I'm going to use this one up until it runs out. So I'm just gluing the different layers onto my card front, making sure that they are on there nice and straight. I used the heart print for my background, and then I've got the little plaid going across the lower part of the card. And then I'm going to add the little flag banner over on the left-hand side a little bit. And then I'm going to work on my focal panel. I've also trimmed down a piece of plain white cardstock to just serve as some stability behind that thin pattern paper, so it will be a little bit stronger, so I can pop that up on the on the card. And then I'm going to add my snowdrifts, and you can see I accidentally misstamped on the back side, but this Spectrum Noir cardstock is so thick that those black lines don't even show through to the other side. So I added those 2 snowdrifts and then put some foam tape on the back of that. So I'll peel off those release papers and figure out where I want that on the card. I wanted a little bit of that plaid pattern to show through at the bottom, so I put it a little bit higher than the center of the card so that you get all of those layers on the outside edges of the focal panel. And then I can bring in my images. I'm going to start with the largest one, which is the snowman, and I'm gluing that down with my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it has that great nozzle that makes it easy to get in all those delicate places, like behind his little skinny branch arms. So I'm going to adhere him so that he is just to the right of that sentiment, so it really highlights it. And then opposite him, I'm going to put our little girl with her lantern, and her one foot was kind of not adhered well, so I just went back under that with another dab of glue and made sure that was stuck down nicely. And then between the snowman and the girl, I'm going to have our little gray rabbit just sitting there in the snow. And I left that snowbank that's kind of beneath him just pure white so it would match that cardstock. And then I'm going to add the tiny little red squirrel over on the far right side in front of the snowman. And now I'm ready to add some embellishment, so I'm going to grab my favorite Stardust Stickles and add that to the pom-pom on the snowman's hat and the girl's hat as well. And I will stick it in the flame of the candle just to give that a little bit of sparkle. And I also decided to add it to the bunny's tail so it would have it somewhere in the center of the card as well. And then for the pink parts of her hat and scarf, I'm going to use some hibiscus stickles. This one is pretty new. I shared it in a recent haul, and I thought it would just be the perfect tone to use right over top of that, and it really did match super well. So I'm just adding a tiny bit to the edge of the scarf and the hat brim to give a little bit of sparkle. I didn't want to cover up too much of those little dotty lines that are in the image. And then I am going to call that good. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and see how that stickles catches the light. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. You could also add a couple little hearts here and there if you really wanted this to be a Valentine card, but I wanted you guys to have your options. So thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have them all listed for you with links down in the description bar below the video, so you can check them out there. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 3 of the previous 2 years of the Valentine Card Series. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.